symbols of French fighting aviation during World War II, even if the leading one is wearing the Swiss colors. Let's say a few words about the Swiss Air Force during the war. As you know, the Switzerland during the war was, just like it is today, a neutral country. And before the war, the Swiss government wisely said, we are going to buy aircraft, military aircraft for defense, and they bought the same numbers of Morane in France and Messerschmitts in Germany. Like this, it was, and this is the Swiss version of the Morane 406 fighter. This one is a Curtiss Hawk 75. We saw it flying earlier this afternoon. It was flying among the Curtiss scenario. And in 1939, when World War II started, it's interesting because it came just before the Battle of Britain. Germany invaded most of Europe, and it stopped for a while the French were fighting what they called the drôle de guerre, a strange war, where nothing much happened during months, and then suddenly was a blitzkrieg, and it came in force, and it was devastation. But nevertheless, the French Air Force, Armée de l'Air, fought during a few weeks against the Germans. The main failure, which can be attributed to the French forces at the time, was a failure in communications. There was no coordination. Units were fighting separately. Radio communications in the air were very poor quality, but nevertheless, in roughly 6 weeks, the French Air Force, using mostly Curtiss H-75, like this one, and Morane 406, like the one on the right, shot down something around 850 German Air Force Luftwaffe aircraft. And a few weeks later, when the Battle of Britain started, the Luftwaffe had lost nearly 1,000 aircraft, a great number of pilots, and if you look at it historically, you could say that the Battle of France, lost by France, but which had results in terms of air superiority, was the first halftime of an history which covered the Battle of France and the Battle of Britain. And when the Battle of Britain started, the Luftwaffe was nearly 1/4 diminished. Its force was diminished by 1/4. And so probably this was of some importance in the way things went later during the Battle of Britain. Remember that people like Air Marshal Dowding had said that the RAF had won the Battle of Britain without knowing it, and the Luftwaffe had lost the Battle of Britain without knowing it. And it was a strange period anyway, and historically very, very, very important, even for our lives today. So the French pilots during that period of 1940, most of them were well trained, very good pilots, very good at aerobatics, very bad at discipline, which is normal, and probably with a little bit of technical problems, again, in terms of radio communications and reliability of armament, even if the most used weapon of World War II was a French gun derived from Hispano-Suiza, and which was equipping the French fighters. The French had, at that time, gone to America to to buy aircraft by the thousands because suddenly being confronted with the reality of war, they found out that they lacked the industrial capabilities to produce enough aircraft, so they went to Curtiss and bought Curtiss 75s, Hawks like this one, the only survivor of World War II wearing French colors. And they also went to Lockheed and ordered, and were the first to order that strange-looking twin-engine sleek aircraft called later the Lightning. And the French were the first to order from Grumman the little stubby fighter called the Wildcat, which was taken over by the Royal Navy as martlets. And so the French had initiated a lot of activity in the American industry, and but most of these aircraft, apart from the Hawk 75s, were never delivered, and most of them, in fact, ended up here in Britain. And it was later, much later, that the French Air Force reformed with the Royal Air Force squadrons like the 341 or the 340, Ile-de-France, and many French pilots were famous in the RAF, like René Mouchotte, who was heading the Biggin Wing for a while before being killed, or the man who was said to be one of the most dangerous coastal command pilot, Wing Commander Maurice, whose real name was Max Gedge. He was a lawyer from Casablanca and too old to be a fighter pilot. It was said he was 34 years old, and he was commanding he was wing commander of the Banff Mosquito wing at the end of the war, and died during the in a Norwegian fjord during the attack of a German cruiser, battleship. Back to America. Or more precisely, back to Los Angeles. Strange place, Los Angeles. If you want to make a film, that's where you have to go. And somebody said, if you want to make an aircraft, that's where you have to go. Most of the aircraft designed and made in Los Angeles look like they've been designed by movie industry artistic directors. In the sky you have the p25, the Mitchell, which was a fantastic medium bomber, and fantastic in the results it had. Flying it can be a nightmare because the thing is not that easy, but right behind it, the sleekest of them all, the incredible p38 Lightning. Both aircraft are here sent from Austria by Red Bull. You know that they do make a bubbling thing with bubbles, and they make a soda. That's normal business, but apart from that, they do a few things in Formula 1 too, and in other high energy sports. And in aviation, Red Bull has a squadron of historic aircraft based in a magnificent hangar in Salzburg called Hangar 7, which is a museum where you have these beautiful flying machines kept. The B-25 was designed, one more, from a French request. Again, 1938, the French wanted to have to buy aircraft from America, and they went to North America and said, we'd like to have a medium-sized bomber, etc., etc. And so North Americans started working on that, and it was a good operation for them because, in fact, it was a good operation for America because using French money, they could design and study new projects and launch them. So the B-25 started life as a medium-sized bomber, and it's a beautiful aircraft. It's going to war. It's crewed by a gang of 5, and the real moment in the history of the B-25 was the Doolittle raid over Tokyo a few months after Pearl Harbor. America has been completely stunned. The American public, because some people knew about it beforehand, and but the American public had been stunned by the Japanese raid on Pearl Harbor, and Jimmy Doolittle, who was the driving force in the American aviation, had suggested to retaliate and set up something very symbolic, but do something, raise the flag again and do something just to tell the Japanese it's not going to be that easy. And they took a dozen of bombers like this one, found enough room on the deck of an aircraft carrier to put them in it. They trained for a while trying to learn how to take off such a big machine from a very short wooden deck of an aircraft carrier. As you see, the B-25 is it's big, but at the same time it's quite maneuverable, despite the fact that it's not heavy on the aileron. It's more than heavy. It's really a muscle plane. You have to muscle it around. But despite that, it flies very, very, very well. It has lots of dark points. For instance, if you lose an engine on takeoff, life is very improbable until you reach the 145 mph, which is very high for a single engine safety speed. But nevertheless, the B-25 was here, and they used it, and they used it well everywhere. And the Doolittle raid happened as, of course, if you go to the movies, you've seen Pearl Harbor, and you know what happened to, even if it's Hollywood style, you know what happened afterwards. The B-25 are, when you listen to it, you still have the feeling that there's something wrong with the engines. It's because they are Wright engines, Wright W-R-I-G-H-T, and these engines do have exhausts stacked differently on the left and the right, and then you have this sound. Looks like there's something wrong. Well, in fact, everything is going very well. And it's a noisy aircraft. It's quite uncomfortable. It's been, but again, when you fly it, you finally fell in love with it. Well, of course, it's true of most aircraft, but this is the one I want if I had the money. That's a flying saucer from Mars. If you try to get back to 1937, 1938, you remember how cars were looking at the time? And then suddenly from Burbank, north of Los Angeles, from the Lockheed factory, emerged that flying machine. It's a flying saucer. It's today we could call it a stealth aircraft because it's so flat and it's really out of this world. It was designed by two gifted gentlemen. chief engineer from Lockheed, Hal Hibbard, and his young deputy, who was Kelly Johnson, who was 25, 26 years old at the time. And I said earlier that someone had said about Johnson that he could see the wind. Even the noise, the sound is incredible, out of this world. And so they designed a heavy fighter, a heavy twin fighter, fighter bomber, but mostly fighter. And this aircraft was flying higher, faster than anything else at the time, and had a devastating amount of armament in the nose. And it's a fact that the most famous American fighter pilots of World War II were flying the p38. Richard Bong, for instance. And this aircraft was not as maneuverable as a single-seater single engine, but due to its aerodynamic characteristics, it could outdive and outclimb everything else. And so if you played energy, if you went up and up and up and up, and transformed your altitude into pure speed, you could make a pass far a burst of your 4 enormous cannons located in the nose, and if you were a good aimer, well, that was it. And then you could go up again. The P-38 was using 2 Allison V12 engine, hence the strange sound, very American, muffled sound. It's a fighter flown not through a stick, but through a wheel. So it's a big aircraft. It's complicated. It's Lockheed. Lockheed never took the easy solutions. When they made aircraft, they make them as complicated as possible. But it worked. And the direct son of the Lightning was another legendary aircraft using the same wing design, and it's called the Constellation. 4-engine, first pressurized airliner in history, and the aircraft which in fact changed our world as a mean of transportation. The Lightning was also the first aircraft to use boosted controls. You could fly it with 2 fingers, like that. The Lightning flew everywhere during the war, in the Pacific, in the Mediterranean, all over Europe. And it was flown by many different people, and then one of them became quite famous later by becoming the world's most widely read author in history, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. He wrote The Little Prince, which still sells more than 1 million copies per year. And today they've clocked more than 130 million copies of The Little Prince sold. And Saint-Ex was flying the same aircraft when he disappeared on the 31st of July 1944 during a recce mission started in Corsica, and which was due to take photos of German forces near the Swiss border. The P-38 became an icon too, and today in the whole wide world there are only, as an average, 4 of them flying out of a grand total of 8 flyable. It's a complicated aircraft, but it's again, it's an icon, and people have went to extreme solutions to get their hands on a p38, just like this team which went to Greenland and dug a 150 feet hole on the ground, on the ice, to pick up and piece by piece a p38 which had landed there during the war and bring it back to life. And now another Angelino aircraft. I said that Los Angeles produced something like 50% of all the movies ever made in history, and they produced mostly 50% of all the aircraft ever produced in history, because they scored hits in both disciplines. And this is the aircraft which really changed the world. The DC-3 when it's civilian, or the C-47, or the Dakota when it's military. But the DC-3, the Douglas Commercial Third of the name, is again an icon. This aircraft was designed during the mid-30s by a small team of engineers in Los Angeles, led by Donald Douglas. Don Douglas was himself a naval engineer in the beginning, and he moved from New York to California because California had some sun, and building aircraft was easier in California, weather-wise, than in New York. And he moved with his wife, 2 kids, and the dog, and $800 he had at the bank, and arrived in Los Angeles and rented the former hairdresser salon and painted on the wall and outside Douglas Aircraft Corporation. And that's how it started. And after designing a few successful military aircraft, he was approached by Jack Fry, who was the boss of one small airline at the time called not yet Trans World Airline, but Transcontinental and Western Airline, to become TWA later. And Jack Fry told him, well, could you design an airplane for 24 passengers with 2 engines, which can lose 1 engine and still fly, and which could be used at night? And so the Douglas team, with one genius engineer in the middle of the gang named Jack Northrop, they designed a thing they called the DC-1, which was roughly the same thing than this one, but a bit smaller. Then they evolved it into the DC-2, which was a bigger. Then finally they evolved it into the DC-3, which is this one, and which became the ultimate in air transport by the end of the 30s. And to prove it, it's the first time insurance companies accepted to insure air passengers if they were flying on DC-3s.
Well, they also invented lie-flat beds in business class, didn't they? It was the first aircraft to have beds in it.
Beds in it.
And that's what it was designed for.
They called them DST.
DST, yeah.
Douglas Sleeper Transport.
Yeah.
Because they were flying at night.
14 beds or 21
seats. And the DC-3, strangely, today, there are nearly 500 of them still flying commercially around the world. Most of them fly as cargo ships, flying bits and pieces for the automotive industry in the US, for instance, because they are still so reliable and so economical that no one ever find a two-way of flying 5 tons of equipment across the sky at a speed which is moderate, but it's 150, 160 miles per hour, which is fast enough, much faster than any truck anyway. The